Welcome to another episode of You Can't Say That, where we dive into things that you're thinking about but nobody else is saying in the health and fitness industry. I'm your host, Jo. Hi, welcome back to the podcast, sitting with boss babe friend and women's strength coach, Leanness from Level Up Aleana. And we're going to discuss a little taboo topic that has come up a lot on my Instagram, in my socials. People asking about dieting and mindset around dieting, and in particular, it kind of led us in the conversation of diet culture and how that's breeding eating disorders, which sounds taboo, but let us take you on that journey. So let's get into your story anyway, Aleana. So dieting and that culture around it has been really heavily involved in your life and as you grew up, and I just wanted you to touch on that experience and even how you've experienced it with your clients, because it's not something that it's a familiar topic to a lot of your female clients as well.
So growing up, my family was always dieting. I can always think back to originally like low fat and then low carb, which was Atkins, and my parents were always trying to lose weight, always good or bad, or like on or off their diet, like constantly. So it was a topic of conversation in our house all the time. And so food was a really big deal of like what's good food, what's bad food. I started dieting probably when I was 12. Started taking like some fat shakes and doing that whole thing, like packing lunches for school. And I thought I was being like really good. And I was like, felt like really in control of like what I was doing and what I was eating, and I felt like better because I was doing that. So it was always a topic. Like my mom would always comment if I've gained weight or if I lost weight, and there's always such like a bit good or bad connotation, and my body was always like talked about, I guess. So I became super obsessed with it, obsessed with dieting, exercising. I was in sports, so I played soccer, basketball, softball, like all the sports, but I would still like exercise more to like still stay like skinny or like smaller, because I was always a bit bigger than my friends, and it freaked me out. And so I would be doing like sit-ups, like hundreds of sit-ups a day, Jane Austen Pilates videos, like I did all the things. And so that's kind of like where the childhood like diet mentality like kind of started, was just like being rooted so deep in my family like history. And then when I went into college, like all that kind of stopped. I like was on the bad, like either good or bad. I was pretty much just eating whatever I wanted, and then I would like get sick of it and like decide to diet and to become healthy. So it was always like on again, off again, good, bad, yo-yo dieting. Like I see a lot of my clients having family histories of like their parents kind of influencing that, or like, oh, I skipped breakfast today so I'm really good, or like, oh, I can wait a little bit longer, I was really good today, I deserve this. And there's always like this morality around like the food and this obsession with food and like worthiness that comes from it.
And that kind of connection between like what you eat and how much you eat, and it shows a level of, oh, look how disciplined I am, or my self-worth of like I can do this and I am superior because of that. So I wanted to talk about, you talked about the good and bad food thing, and this has come up a lot, and I find it a lot in people that I speak to, even in myself. Like I spent many years categorizing food as good and as bad, and kind of how that mentality is really unhealthy. So yeah, let's touch on that.
I feel like with every different diet, there's a different iteration of what's good and what's bad. So starting off in low carb world, like carbs were bad, right? And then going into, then I did a Whole30 and like paleo, and that has a massive list of good and bad. And so whenever you're eating like the good, like you feel good about yourself, you feel like you're on the right track, and you're like doing it right. And then when you're eating the bad food, then you feel bad, and it's like your self-worth gets tied up in these good and bad foods. So if you are, you know, like on a weekend going out and like you ate the bad foods, and so then you're like, well, I already messed it up, so might as well just keep going, right? Like we call that the fuck it mentality. Like I might as well just keep eating everything, and now you have the guilt and like feeling bad about it and feeling bad about yourself, and that like keeps perpetuating this binge then deprive kind of cycle that we go through. And I think a lot of it has to do with that, like, worthiness.
And this is good and this is bad. And like you were saying, and I think you made a really good point about every different diet will have a different iteration of what's good and what's bad. And it's like keto and your low carbs will say if I had wheat and I had bread, that's the devil. If I had banana, it's like, that's too many carbs. But if I then suddenly changed my diet in time and I decided that I would then have a high carb vegan diet, for example, and then suddenly fats were the devil, you know, the fat you eat is the fat you wear is the mantra of that kind of diet.
Is that a saying?
Yes, the fat you eat is the fat you wear.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's high carb vegan diet is very, it's interesting to see like your worthiness change, but the rules have changed, and that's what's like, it's not necessarily the food has changed itself, it's your version of whether it's good or bad. And for me, it took a long time to, and I find myself being consciously aware of that still, not to use those words, not to say, I'm gonna have this donut, I know it's bad for me. I try and use different phrases around that. So for me, it's like a matter of saying, this probably doesn't have as many nutrients as having like fruit, vegetables. So like less nutritionally dense or more energy dense.
More calorie dense.
More calorie dense.
My clients say, oh, that's one of the things you always say is calorie dense. And I'm like, do I say that a lot?
But I think it's a really important point. It's like you've programmed your way of saying that because, and I've made a post about this previously, is that food isn't necessary, like it's on a continuum, and it should be every kind of food can be part of your diet and it can be part of your life. It's just that there's different times where foods would be better value for money. Is what I say. You're like kind of like your exchange in terms of like eating is like better like bang for your buck. It's like a much more healthy way to live. But yeah, I guess that good and bad mentality comes from this diet culture of
and I think it reflects way too much on then you personally. Like if you are eating the bad foods, how you feel about yourself is then bad. Even though what is bad, it depends on what the diet is.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of underlying self-esteem and control issues there, and that I think that's where we start seeing disordered eating tendencies coming from labeling things as good and bad and the underlying like morality, I guess, of it. If you're eating the good food, like you feel like you're doing something right and like you're so disciplined and you're better than the people who are like, you know, eating the bad food, whatever you deem is the bad food. And so there's like, again, that self-worth, it's like tied up into like what it is that you're eating and how others view you because of what you're eating. And so you feel like you have like this little like badge of honor, like I'm more disciplined than you, I can do it and you can't, and I'm better than you, which is so gross. Like at the time I wouldn't have thought that as like middle schooler packing my salads for lunch. I wouldn't have thought I'm better than you because of eating salad, but that was like the underlying tone, was that like I have more discipline and I can do it and you can't.
How did that affect you emotionally, mentally, like as you continue to, you know, fall in and out of different diets? How did that have an impact on you, like psychologically?
So whenever I was lean, because I was like doing some diet and like hyper controlled and I was lean, I would get more like accolades for that. Like people would be like, you look so great, you look shredded, like what are you doing? You're so healthy. And I'd like eat that up, right? But then as soon as I would like go off the wagon and, you know, binge and gain weight or like just go off completely, I would stop getting those like compliments. And you like those compliments, right? So then you kind of like, oh, if I could just get back to that. So then you do another diet and then you just want to keep getting that like affirmation from other people if you're not getting that affirmation from yourself. And I think that's, again, like with the self-esteem, it all kind of is tied in together. Yeah,
absolutely. And it kind of leads me into where I came from in like a fitness modeling, bodybuilding, competition prep phase was, you know, I was always big girl mentality. And both of us are like quite tall and just athletically built, just naturally, just stature is not like we don't have small frames, but I spent my whole life trying to become this petite, small frame. Like all I wanted was to be that short, little, cute, like size 6 girl, you know. But I'd never be that way. I've always had shoulders, always had quads, and didn't really like work for them. They're just always there. And I loved food. I had a really good relationship with food, and my family, you know, food was like brought us together, coming from an Eastern European background. And so grew up with lots of good food and a lot of love around food, and then obviously having this sort of big girl mentality. Even though I wasn't like huge, I would have been overweight for my height and size at the time, but I wasn't by all means like you would see me and you would be like this, you weren't that big, but in my head bigger than I visually saw.
I even have that, like, I have friends from the past, I tell these stories a lot, and they're like, I don't remember you being that overweight or like that big, but like to me I was like, you know, big, huge,
yeah, which is in itself like such a red flag, for then the whole dieting culture creating this sort of disordered pattern of eating. And so I mean, I think I fell into dieting and stuff, say like between like 15, 16, and like fast forward sometime. My first gym membership was when I was 18, and then as I fell into that, I also, because of my all or nothing mentality, very like, I just dive right into things. And so I think
hardcore,
very, just all the way. So I jumped right into the gym, loved it. Obviously I started to be more mindful of my food, because I was like, what's the point if I'm going to be exercising? I want to see some results. Saw some results, got very addicted to that, and then kind of fell into lifting weights and being kind of, at the time, not many females doing it. And I just felt a little bit like boss doing that. And so I was like, let's take it to the next level. And that's when I fell into, I guess, competitive fitness modeling or competitive bodybuilding, and wanting to see how I could transform my body. And at the time, thought it was harmless. It was like a way of me, pursuing a sport. I wasn't really sporty as a kid. I was like, this is great. But in hindsight, looking back, the intentions behind me doing it were very, very wrong, very unhealthy. I came into it thinking I will achieve that dream, that goal of being that small, really lean little girl. I spent my whole life trying to be this small, petite, lean, build this perfect body. And so I did the whole prep, ate chicken and broccoli, restricted calories, really hardcore. Like I think I was on like 1,000, 1,200 by the end, and exercising excessively just to lose weight. I stepped on stage the first time and was proud because like it was such a long haul process. Spent some time out of that, very confused coming out of it, because I no longer knew like what was the drive or purpose or intention.
Did you do the whole rebound afterwards?
Yeah, 100%. I've rebounded. They say the hardest part of prep is not necessarily dieting into it, but it's dieting out. They call it a reverse diet. So you should be like slowly implementing calories back. But when you diet for so long, you're like, fuck this.
So
I want to eat.
Yeah.
And so I did, and I ballooned out. And then I was like, people saw this image of me, which I, of this like, oh, I'm standing on stage, like I'm leaner than I've ever been, super tan. But now if they saw me, I don't look like that anymore. Like, and sort of, you're very confused about your purpose. So I went into another prep, like about a year or two later, decided I wanted to do it again. And this time things were different. Like, I mean, the intention was still there. I still wanted to be that like shredded, lean person. But when I stepped on stage after 20 weeks of prep, which is 6 months, by the way, of like very extreme dieting, I was not even proud. Still looked in the mirror and tore myself apart, like in terms of what I looked like. I wasn't lean, and I felt not lean enough. I looked at the other girls around me competing, and I was like, well, they look like they're ready. I don't think I'm even ready to be on stage. Despite losing like, I don't know, over 10 kilos. I was like underweight for my size.
I remember seeing the photos.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the time, I did not think that at all. And that's when I realized that no matter how much I restricted, exercised, dieted, whatever size I became, that wasn't going to lead me to happiness. Even though I created this thing in my head of like, if I achieve this body size, this will create eternal happiness for me. And so
Not
that's
true.
Which, yeah, and
I can attest to.
yeah, and so it was a very long road, hard road to learn that, and still at that point I was confused about like where to from here. I'd known for so long just to eat chicken and broccoli.
Were you like, I'm done after this, or like what happened?
I went straight into veganism at the time.
That's when it started.
Yeah, this is when it all started. I basically
like, no more chicken and broccoli.
Yeah,
no more chicken ever.
And so that became, I thought, was a liberating experience, because I no longer was bound to chicken and broccoli as a restriction. I was now open up to all foods. As long as they didn't have any animal products, I was open to all foods.
And when you say all foods, that doesn't sound like very many foods. Like,
yeah, I thought I was open to all these different foods, but like, you have to remember that I was eating fish and broccoli or chicken and broccoli every meal, and I didn't know how else to be healthy without those meals anymore. I thought veganism would be the answer, and I spent 4 years of my life doing that, and it was the warning signs that as my health, it started to influence my health at the end, but also it wasn't really aligning with my values by the end, and I noticed that it was just another label for me to put another restrictive label to put on myself or to put on food. But I think what I would deem at the time the best part about it is that underlyingly it gave me an excuse to not eat what everyone else was eating, be able to choose from a select amount of food on the menu, because people couldn't argue that. They're like, well, she doesn't eat animal products because of her own values. But it was, for me, easier than saying like, oh, I'm afraid to eat. I'm afraid to eat different food. Yeah.
That's deep.
Yeah. And so
it was just your new little label of like controlling
food. Yeah. Yeah. So I think when I realized that and I started to implement animal products back in, it was like more of like a liberating experience, a freeing experience for my mental state, to be like, it's okay if you eat eggs, you won't suddenly gain 20 kilos. It wasn't necessarily moving at like, I'm anti-vegan. It was more of me understanding that I was just, this is a pattern of restriction on food, self-imposed disordered eating behavior that I need to work through. Let's back your bikini story. I want to hear about it. I know the story, but let's get our listeners to...
So back, I have a really similar story of like, not even a competition. I just wanted to get lean to go on a holiday, and my friend who I was going to go see was like my skinny friend. Like growing up, she was always like the lean one, the pretty one. And I wanted to like finally like feel good next to her, because I felt like the fat girl or like the big girl. I know, right? Yeah. And so I got super lean. At that point, I didn't have a lot of muscle, so I was just like really skinny. And I didn't have a bikini, and I remember being like, yes, I'm going to go shopping for a bikini, and I'm going to try on any bikini I want, and they're all going to look good because I'm finally skinny. And when I got there, none of the bikinis fit, because I had completely just lost my boobs fully. Like, I went from a D cup to like an A cup, and I just cried. Here I am with like 6-pack abs, and I just like cried in the dressing room, and nothing would make me happy, you know? Like, I didn't like myself when I was fat, I didn't like myself when I was skinny. It was just like, what's it going to take for me to actually like be okay?
Yeah, and it's a
my body's
confusing
like.
place to be because you're like, this is one end of the spectrum and this other end of the spectrum, and neither of them have made me happy. Because that comes from within, really, and it sounds really sappy and like, like self-love, but that's kind of where it comes from. So I guess like moving into understanding that, okay, I'm being really aware that dieting and diets are just is self-imposed restrictions around all food rules. How do we move out of that, basically? How did you move out of that?
How did I move out of it? I went through so many different diet iterations. I mean, it started with Atkins, and then we went to Whole30 and Paleo, and then we went into macro counting, which was a weird transition because then I was like, I can eat anything, but it like has to fit these numbers. And so then I would go on like I was always a yo-yo dieter, right? So I'd go macro tracking for a while. I'd get super shredded, get sick of it because it's so mentally demanding to log your food every day and weigh your food all the time. So then I'd go off and then I'd gain weight and then I'd be like, okay, I just gotta get back on. And so then I'd go back on. And every single time I went back on the diet or back on the macro tracking, it was harder. Every time, like my brain just like resisted much harder. And one day I decided about a year and a half ago that we were gonna do this new diet, me and my flatmates. And it was actually a hypertrophy. So it was meant to be more food, but this was a lower calorie day because we weren't training that day. And my flatmates were getting ice cream at Kohl's, and I was there, and I didn't have enough calories for ice cream. So I threw a tantrum. I was like so upset. I don't think I cried, but like I think I was like this close to crying, like in the supermarket. And that's when I was just like, that's it, I'm done. Like I'm done with dieting. I'm not macro tracking again. Like whatever is gonna happen, and I'm just gonna figure it out. So since I've done so much dieting and I've done so much learning about food, I know a lot about food already. So I have like certain kind of frameworks in my mind of like what is a good like nutritious meal that's going to help me in my goals and what's not such a great meal. So I have that background and didn't need to be like eat everything because that doesn't feel good. So like it had to be a little trial and error, you know, like you could go down and eat all these foods, but if at the end of the day you don't feel good, it's like, okay, well that's not going to work. But then restriction doesn't work, so you have to find like this middle ground.
Yeah.
So the last year and a half, I've been like doing this middle ground where I'm like not the most lean person that I've ever been, but I'm also not like off the rails and binging on candy every day and overeating until I have to unbutton my pants. Like that was the thing. Like I would stuff myself into my pants. So it's been like a bit of a journey, and then also along the way I've had to really come to the terms of like what my body is, and like if nothing changed, like if I never got leaner than what I am right now, am I okay with that? And I had to finally be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with how I am right now, and if that stays like that, like I can always obviously go back to dieting, like, and it's liberating to just be able to eat what I want and not like beat myself up about it is amazing.
And that's a really good point. It's that mental freedom that you have, and the fact that you think that you are in control of your food when you're on a diet because you've created these rules, but actually food controls you. And you mentioned the whole like you used to eat until you were sick.
Like literally, I would throw up. I would be so full.
So
like, I've done that too many times.
And so it had very similar experiences because it's like food is controlling you. You can't stop. It's that binge restrict mentality. Even if you don't have a binge eating disorder, like you can't deny that these are very, very in that eating disorder continuum, 100%. Like on that track. I went through so many comp prep phases, and I had a coach who would tell me like have a diet plan and have food to eat. So my education around food wasn't like, it was self-educated later down the track, but during that bodybuilding phase, like I didn't really know about food. I got given a diet plan, and so if it wasn't on that, I didn't know how to eat. I didn't know how to make a well-balanced meal. I didn't know what would be calorically sound to fit in my food to still put me on track for this competition. And so every Sunday I used to have this cheat meal, and then like closer to the date we'd just take it all out because I couldn't, it wasn't a meal, it was like eat until I was sick.
Cheat day.
It's until 11:59 p.m. if it turns to midnight, that's the end of Sunday. I'd eat until I was absolutely disgustingly sick. And nowadays I find myself having like treats, I guess, if you want to call them that. Like I have chocolate every day, but I'm not sitting there as like previously I would have been concerned about having chocolate in the house during the week, because I'd feel like I'd just have the whole block in one go. I'm too scared to have it.
I couldn't have peanut butter at one point.
Yeah, like, that's still a trigger food for me.
I can have it now, but paleo was like, peanut butter's bad.
Yeah.
And so just like one little taste.
And I don't find myself getting to the weekend and praying for this cheat meal, and I can go and be at a dinner party with friends and not feel like I'm sitting there deciding to wear my fat pants because I'm just going to stay at the dining table and continue eating. So I think that, for me, very emotionally liberating. To know that I'm actually okay, and I'm not like going to just go off the rails for doing so.
I think that there's this kind of mentality that I've taken that's like, as much as you restrict, like you will have an like equal but opposite reaction. So like you restrict super hard, then you're gonna have like an equal but opposite
so true.
binge. And I see that over again with my clients as well. Like, for example, I've had somebody like getting ready for a wedding and they lose a bunch of weight. I'm like trying to instill sustainable practices, but like they're just gung ho.
Yeah.
And then of course after the wedding they gain it all back, because it's like, as much as you're restricting, like even if it, like you think it's not super restrictive, like say it's like intermittent fasting, like I believe that's a restrictive diet, or it's veganism or whatever, like however many like months or years, it doesn't have to be like that weekend that the binge is going to happen, but it's going to happen sometime down the line. Like there will be like an equal but opposite reaction. And so every time I'm like, oh, I'm going to clean it up on Monday, like if I had a big weekend, I'm going to clean it up on Monday. Like every time I find myself going into that like little like mental like narrative of like, I'm going to clean it up, I'm going to lose a couple kilos, like I'm going to get a little bit more lean, and it's all like innocent. But remember, like, how does that turn out for you?
Yeah.
How does this story end?
Yes.
And I know how it ends, and it's not a fun ending. Yeah. It's exciting when you start a new diet though. Like I get it. Like I see diets, I'm like, oh, that could really work. Like
because you're hopeful of the outcome, and people are selling you that story, and that's why diets are such a lucrative business. They basically make money off you failing. Yeah. So they want you to fail because they'll create the next diet for you to follow and fail. And that sounds freaking harsh, but it's kind of like that's how they make money. Like Weight Watchers doesn't have your best interest, like temporarily, but they want you to continue coming back as a business. So how do we say I want to lose some body fat but still not be in that restrictive mentality? Like what are some tips? How have you gone about doing so?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can do it. If I'm working with somebody and they have any history of like dieting or like disordered eating around, like not necessarily like a diagnosed eating disorder, but like disordered views around food, like I'm not going to be like, all right, cool, we're going to start a macro plan, because I know that's not going to work for them. Mostly what I work with people is on behaviors and habit changes, and figuring out what they're doing and like what we can do and make small changes that will actually like move the dial. Certain things like meal timing and like all these little tiny things aren't moving the dial. Like we do like the big dial movers first, and we try to make those habits before we like add on another layer and add on another layer. But we all have to do it in a very like mindful way. So I coach more of an like intuitive eating approach, where we're talking more about like what feels good in your body, like when you're listening to your hunger and fullness cues, and more like frameworks around that kind of thing than setting up a meal plan or handing them a diet with an eat this, don't eat that, or macro guidelines. Just because we know that in the long term, like will keep them stuck. You know, if I hand you a meal plan, it doesn't teach you how to eat. It will just teach you how to eat this meal plan until you're sick of it, and then you still don't know what to do at the end of the day. So the habits that I'm trying to instill in my clients is more like how to eat for life, and it's not like sexy or like marketable to be like, learn how to eat for life.
Yeah. And that's where it's not appealing to people, because like you don't see results instantly. But like the long-term benefits of it is that you just are so much more happy within yourself and within your lifestyle, and you feel like your whole life doesn't have to change and revolve around it. Just implementing those like small things, and they sound so lame, like it just seems like oh, like, you know, make sure you drink more water, and like see that that's maybe it's your dehydration that's making you feel hungry, or
like,
sleep, like
shocked.
yes, like
stress management.
maybe that's something you should work on. And it's like, that sounds boring and like not very fun. Like if I can tell you, oh, your eating windows between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m, you'd be like, yeah, that's gonna work. Yeah, because it's restriction, but like sounds
just
much
drink
more
this shake
interesting.
for 2 meals a day. Like, oh, that makes
It sounds much more like, oh yeah, that sounds legit. But if I say you should probably sleep another hour every night, fuck, that's gonna change my weight. Yeah, frick it is.
Turn off the TV.
Yeah,
Put your
so
phone away.
it's not as sexy, like you're saying. And I love that you're all about that, like, get educated about food that makes you feel good, and then just like, I guess, macros around that. And I think that's something that is so important. I was going through that bodybuilding phase and being given a diet, and not knowing food or outside of that. I remember being in a comp prep and working one day. I thought I'd finish at midday, so I didn't have my food with me. Thought I'd go home so I could like freshly prepare my meal. I was in the middle of a prep, and I was about to walk out the door. My boss goes, "Hey, Joe, where are you going?" What do you mean? I'm finished for the day. He's like, "No, you're teaching another class. You've got." So I used to work in an RTO, fitness RTO. If you know me, you'd know where I was working, and so I had to be on. Like I had to be ready and like present. Very severely undernourished at this point. Boss says, "No, you're working till 5." And so I literally just stormed out crying. And because I honestly just didn't know what to eat. I was so freaked out because I was like, if I eat something outside of this will derail all of my results. And so I freaked out and I decided I'm just not going to eat until I get home. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to have to survive. And I distinctly remember my boss ringing me up. I was outside crying and I couldn't show him that I was crying. And
Poor Joe.
Me saying, "Joe, what do you need? What food do you need?" And so I'm telling him 120 grams of like chicken breast, 100 grams of sweet potato, 100 grams of broccoli, and I remember the meal to this day. And he actually went and bought it for me, cooked it, prepared it, brought it to me in that class that I was presenting in. Like, best boss of the year award, but also just how crazy is that like you could...
I think he understood the crazy because has he been part of that world?
Well, no, not necessarily, but I mean, working in the fitness industry, he would have been exposed to a lot of those kind of like people and like those people. But it's just that whole like, I had no education around food, and suddenly if it didn't fit, I freaked out. I didn't know what to eat, and that's in a more relatable sense for people that aren't prepping for a competition. But you know, that food anxiety when you go out, or food anxiety when you're eating socially, is because I don't know what would be a good choice, or I'm scared because this is going to derail all of my results. And it's such a common thing that people experience but don't talk about enough. And again, it breeds that restriction and that food rule and the like disordered eating behavior. And it wasn't until like I started to learn about food, and macro counting was a really important part of that journey. It taught me so much, but
so much learning.
Looking
at food labels.
Yes, and you start to really realize what's in food, and what makes you feel good, and you can play around with the macronutrients, like the levels of what makes you feel good and what works for your lifestyle. Like I function really well on about like, you know, like not a higher carb, but higher-ish carb, moderate fat, moderate protein. Just for now, works really well. But like, you know, that might change in time. And I think I was very, very adamant about hitting these numbers initially when I did macro counting, until I realized that like that number is just deemed by a computer. Like it doesn't know your body. I think I listened to a podcast saying that one day, and it hit home to me. I was like, how does this body know I need X amount of
And
calories?
also, like, how accurate are the actual labels? Like,
Right.
they did one test on
Yes.
this food at one point, and they
Yep.
just assumed all the other foods in that same line.
So it's that,
It's like a guesstimate.
it is, and it is a fine line between like or like understanding the macronutrient caloric density of food, the nutrient level of food, and intuitive eating. I think like intuitive eating comes from just like having an understanding of food and then how that makes you feel here. So like on the inside. So
on that one, like if I have someone, like we were talking about with my clients,
Yes.
somebody that doesn't have necessarily a bad relationship with food and they actually just don't know anything about food, I might do a macro approach. And I love what Ashley Pardo calls intuitive macros, where it's like first you learn macros and you learn like what works for your body, and she usually reverse diets people out of like low calorie diets, and then take away the macro counting and implement intuitive eating. And I love that approach. Where it's like,
let's wrap it up. Regardless of the diet name that you choose to follow, they all implement the same structure, which is restriction of calories and rules around certain food groups that are like good and bad in line with that diet. And that in itself, that culture can breed very disordered ways of viewing food. And I think people think eating disorder, think skin and bones anorexia, but eating disorders or disordered eating behaviors can stem from just deciding to only eat between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. or eating high fat, low carb.
They're putting every single thing on the scale.
Yeah, they're all disordered ways of behaviors around food and eating.
It all has a different look. Like right? It doesn't look like the skinny anorexic woman. It doesn't look like bulimia. It's a continuum, right? Like
absolutely.
Especially when it's wrapped up in your identity and wrapped up in your self-worth, which most perpetual dieters it is.
Yes, absolutely. But know that there is a way out. And like we've both been on that journey and we continue to be on that journey. I'm not saying I'm perfect at all, and there are times that like I can very much fall back into that mentality of I shouldn't eat as much, or I need to exercise more because of XYZ. But being more aware of it is definitely like a good way out, and it's so liberating, and it's like much more positive way of living.
How much more mental space do you have when you don't think about food all the time?
Mental freedom is huge.
Food freedom.
So thank you, Aleana, for chatting with us today. If you have any questions or you're experiencing similar things, comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and follow Aleana on her IG. She does lots of awesome content.
Level Up with Aleana?
Yes, Level Up with Aleana. I will put that in the description bar, and we'll see you in the next episode.